Welcome to Yacht Crew Vlogs, where we tell the stories of those in the yachting industry. A behind-the-scenes look that discovers the individuals in the industry, their history, their passions, and what inspires them to do what they do. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Yacht Crew Vlogs right here on Yachting International Radio. My name is Ria. I am your host, and I'm very pleased to welcome my next guest. She will remain nameless, but she is joining us as a survivor. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Ria. Thanks for having me.
Now, you were unfortunate enough to meet a Mr. Jack Magruder.
Yes. Yeah, I met Jack in 2018 on board a yacht. We worked together, and yeah, that's unfortunately how I met him and where my journey started with him. He was the chase boat captain, or tender captain, should I say, and I was working on board the sort of mothership. And yeah, within a few weeks, or quite early on, Jack and I started a romantic relationship together. Yeah, he seemed fine at first.
What was it about him? Like, one of the things that I have heard in the other stories is that he was very, very charming and very charismatic.
Yes, yeah. He was definitely a sort of southern gentleman, as you would say, and very intense. He I don't know, he seemed kind of too good to be true. And he had this sort of intense look in his eyes. I don't know what it was, but it definitely looked or felt more of a connection than I'd felt before. But yeah, he would open the car door for you. He would, yes, sir, and ma'am. And he was just so charming, so sweet and thoughtful. And just, I couldn't believe how sort of lucky I was.
So sort of Prince Charming out of those fairy tale books that we read about when we're kids growing up. And that's all we ever want. We imagine we're going to meet Prince Charming one day and they're going to treat us like a princess or a queen. And that's it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I thought. And he was like, he was very good at being this Prince Charming. And he wore this mask very well, and I never really saw behind that initially. And he was well liked by crew, and the owners loved him, and he was really intelligent, really good at his job. Yeah, you'd never even suspect sort of what was to come.
When did he first sort of start displaying behavior that made you hesitate? Not necessarily when there was red flags, but things that you kind of went or thought about later and went, that was a bit odd.
Yeah, there was one incident when I sort of, before we got together, and he was quite drunk, and he had been out drinking, and I was there too, and I just sort of didn't like what I was seeing. He was just a bit, I don't know, a bit aggressive verbally, and just a bit arrogant, and I hadn't seen that side of him, and I actually was really put off, and so I left. And I got woken up in the middle of the night by him trying to sort of take my clothes off and was being quite aggressive, and I sort of tried to laugh it off, like, you're too drunk, like, what are you doing, kind of thing. We hadn't even kissed at this point, so yeah, that I kind of put that off as like I downplayed it, I guess. But looking back now, that was a huge red flag. And after that incident, once again, he was just Prince Charming, and it makes that situation, or it minimizes that, or it doesn't seem as severe as what it kind of was. Because I mean, he obviously wasn't, that could have been quite a bad night, but I managed to downplay it a little bit. But so that was probably the first warning sign. But after that, not so much. Like, he just seemed too good to be true. He had opened up to me quite early on about his past and how he had quite a rough upbringing and a very abusive childhood in more ways than one. And yeah, I mean, my heart broke for him, but he kind of used that as an excuse as well whenever he wouldn't act sort of correctly, or so I don't know, my heart broke for him. I didn't have that. I mean, I didn't want to save him or anything like that. It was just, it really was, it felt like such an intense connection, and it just felt so right. And I guess I didn't know the extent of how sort of damaged he is or was.
Yeah.
It would be probably a few months later, I noticed other signs of him. He would get so frustrated and so angry that he would start sort of like punching the steering wheel, or at times he would sit there and start punching himself until he was bleeding. And I would try and stop him, and then he would turn into this big mess, and he'd be so upset and he'd be suicidal. And it was a roller coaster of emotions with Jack. It would be extreme highs and extreme lows. And that was just within a few months.
And what did he tell you about his past relationships?
Yes. So he had told me that he was in a relationship for about 5 years and that they'd been broken up, but he made me believe that she was quite crazy and stay away. Not that I would contact her for any reason anyway. So you don't really want to chat to your partner's exes, right?
Right.
And he made me believe that she was super crazy, and the damage that his mother had done to him was horrific. And yeah, he didn't speak nicely of his ex either.
So through this time, he was actually still stalking his ex,
Yeah.
which of course you didn't know about. So how did that come about?
I don't know. I don't know how he had the time to do that. But yeah, I had no idea. I only found that out recently, that throughout our relationship, he was actually contacting her and sending her photos and videos and wanting to get back with her, apparently, which is mind-blowing because he seemed so happy with me and always mentioned how much he sort of hated her. And yeah, it is crazy. I almost still can't really believe it now, but yeah, still wrapping my head around that one.
At some point, you moved. He got you
Yeah.
to move from where you were living in Fort Lauderdale, or that area anyway, to where she was living. Was it because your job had ended, or did you quit to move? What was the story there?
So we worked on board this boat together for about maybe 6 months. And the owners, we started finding out more about the owners, and they weren't very good people to work for. So we left. And then we decided to go to Colorado to do sort of an off-season sort of snowboarding winter and potentially look for sort of freelance work along the way. I had no idea that his ex was there. He just told me that he's been there before, he loved it, he loved snowboarding, and we just thought, yeah, let's go base ourselves there. So we actually drove across the state from Fort Lauderdale to Colorado, and we lived there for about 3 months, and I had no idea the whole time that his ex was there. I was looking forward to some time off as well. And because I'm from sort of bigger motor yachts, that's where I've been in yachting about 10 years now. And he is from smaller sailing yachts. Our CVs didn't line up so well. So we were looking for work together, and we were finding freelance work and day work and stuff. But we just thought, all right, go and do a winter season, which was amazing. Like, our time out there was good, apart from a few red flag moments, which in the time you don't see them as red flags. You just think, my biggest concern was him. He was so, you'd see something happen and then he'd be so suicidal, and it would shake what happened, and you'd just end up focusing on him. So there would be an argument and he would throw me into a wall, and then he would turn into such a mess that you forget about you. You just try and help this guy. And I really did believe that he would take his life. And that scared the hell out of me. So yeah, a lot of those sort of red flag moments.
Were they usually precipitated by alcohol, or did he need alcohol to react? Yeah.
Mostly alcohol induced, but he didn't drink too much, because when he did, I think it was harder for him to control that side of him. So that would happen during the day, or if he got angry, he didn't know how to sort of self-regulate that. It would just turn into this intense anger that, nothing that I've seen before. So.
And it was only directed at you. He wouldn't be the same way with his buddies or...
I've seen him, with colleagues, I never saw anything. With friends, nothing. But with the odd stranger, I've seen him snap. And I think there was one kid that was learning to snowboard that kind of cut him off by accident. And he turned around and just like shoved him over. It was obviously a pure accident, but he got in Jack's way and he was not happy about that. So, I mean, who pushes a kid over?
So it almost seems as if those that he viewed were weaker than himself.
Yes. Yeah.
When was sort of the next time that you realized that maybe perhaps there was an issue?
When we decided to leave Colorado and go back, we were still looking for work together. And I'd seen these sort of red flags and I knew Jack had a lot to unpack. And I just felt that the yachting industry is not a hugely stable environment for someone that has gone through what he's gone through. And so we both kind of decided to try and move to New Zealand, which is where I'm from. And February 2019, we had booked our flights from Miami to LA and then LA to Auckland. And we made our first leg and we were at the gate ready to board our flight out of the States. And it was about midnight. And all of a sudden, these 8 FBI agents came in, sort of tackled him to the ground and started reading him his rights. And I was obviously just in disbelief of what was going on. I tried to ask what was happening. The officers wouldn't tell me what the charges were because of privacy. And all they could tell me was that it was felony charge and he obviously can't make this flight. So at this point, I'm sitting there scared to death. The first thing that goes through my mind is this poor guy, like he's been through so much. How could you do this to him, kind of thing? And I had to stay. So I stayed.
So even at that stage, you had no clue what they could be arresting him for?
No idea. Nothing about his past. All I knew was that he had a rough, really, really hard upbringing. And he had a crazy ex. That's all I knew, supposedly. And the next day I just went round to police stations in LA and I was trying to find Jack. And someone finally helped me and said that he was going to appear in court the next day. So I went to court the next day and found out then that he had charges placed against him in Colorado. And you can't post bail when the charges are out of state. So he was they could hold him for up to a month. And if Colorado chose not to expedite him, then all the charges would have been dropped and he would have been free to go. But they weren't going to tell us when he would be expedited in case he tried to plan an escape. That's kind of how they operate. So I stayed in LA sort of day in and day out, scared to death because we had times where we would call certain times of the day and if he didn't make that call, then I would assume that he's either been expedited or he's been beaten up or the prison's in lockdown. He was in one of the most maximum security prisons during this time. And because he's a white, blonde hair, blue-eyed male, no tattoos, and he actually speaks fluent Spanish, it's one of his degrees, the prisoners thought that he was sort of undercover. So he was a bit of a target in jail. I mean, I don't know how much to believe now, like in the time, and it might have been true, but I can't believe anything he says now. But he did. He got beaten up one day. A prisoner was murdered in his cell. There's something like 62 prisoners in his cell. So they went into lockdown. So it was sort of day in and day out. It was just petrifying. And I'm sort of staying night by night on the outside, not knowing when he's going to go. And I'm sitting with 6 check-in bags because we're moving country. It was a bit of a tumultuous time. But at this point, I had found out that these charges were placed from his ex and they were extortion charges. or it's a felony.
Mhm.
And Jack just kept saying that none of this is true. She's just trying to get him, and she's just upset that he left her. And so he spun a really good story, a really believable story. And it just made my heart break for him. And I got angry. I couldn't believe how his ex could do this to him when he'd been through so much. It really, really upset me. And yeah, after about 3 weeks, he was expedited to Colorado. And so I flew up there and waited for him. And I got to see him in the cell in Colorado, in Aspen. And he begged me not to come to the court case the next day. I think he'd heard Kirsten's statement. And he spun it in a way that was like, he didn't want me to see him like this. He didn't want me to see him in the yellow or the orange jumpsuit and the handcuffs. And he got angry. He was just like, if you do, then we're over. If you come. And I'd gone through so much waiting for him and gone through all these ups and downs, and I was devastated. But something inside me just trusted him, and I didn't go to the court case. And I think if I did, I would have heard what Kirsten's statement was. I would have probably seen her. I was so scared sitting there for days while he was in jail that I would bump into his horrible ex, because he painted such a nasty picture of her.
And what I understand is that from her statement, though, you probably would have recognized a lot of what had gone on in your relationship up to that point.
Yeah,
in some
absolutely.
of the things that she spoke about on the stand.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it would have been interesting. He kept that separation between us. Like, I never wanted to make contact. And I think she knew deep down that if she talked to me, Jack is so good at manipulating the story that she almost knew that she wouldn't have any effect talking to me. So we've been in contact over the last few months, and it's been really kind of healing talking to her and hearing so much more truth has come out of this time, and clarity and sort of validation about what happened. Yeah, so after that, Jack pretty much got away with it. He got put on probation for 3 years, and he had to appear in court again in a month's time. So he was granted permission to leave the state because he had no ties to stay in Colorado. He had no work, no home. So they allowed him to go to Florida to work and then reappear in court when he was requested to. So we went back to Florida and we worked from there. He flew back a month or two later to go to court, and the DA wasn't ready. So his court case got pushed back another few months. But at this point, because the DA wasn't ready, they allowed him to leave the country and start a new life in New Zealand, which is what we had planned to do. So he had a really good lawyer, a very expensive good lawyer. And yeah, at that point we left to go live in New Zealand, and that was probably April 2019. And once again, at this point, he was on his best behavior. Like, I just saw Prince Charming. I just saw this poor guy that's just gone through so much and has to deal with all this again. And it broke my heart. Until we got to New Zealand, there was another incident not long after arriving home where he got incredibly jealous that I was with one of my guy mates. We were all away for a weekend away. There was a big group of us and we're on the lake, and Jack just got, once again, a few too many drinks, and he wanted to try and fight this friend of mine. And the guys were all trying to tell him to just calm down, mate, like, it's all good. I've been friends for years with them. And Jack kind of stormed off, so I went off to go and see if he was okay. And he just started once again sort of hitting himself, and then I tried to stop him, and he just pinned me down and dropped his knee into my ribs, and then he stopped, and I couldn't believe what had happened. Once again, it felt like, poor Jackie went into this suicidal mode again, and you forget about sort of what happens to you because you're so concerned with them. So in hindsight, looking back, that was probably one of the more severe incidents. The biggest sort of incident that happened in New Zealand was fueled by alcohol again. He'd managed to get a job there, and he seemed to be liking what he was doing, but I guess not reaching his full potential. And so he sort of was in a world where we were living in my country and around my friends and sort of in my hometown. And I think he felt quite isolated, which he sort of used as an excuse now and then. But it was, 4th of July, which is an American holiday, Independence Day, and he decided to take himself to a pub and start drinking, and I would try and meet him after work, and we would have a beer together and get a burger and try and celebrate this special day for him. Unfortunately, I finished work about 5, but he was angry that it taken me that long to sort of finish work. I'd managed to leave earlier. I was set to finish at 9, so I thought I did everything I could to try and spend that time with him. And when I turned up to the pub, he was very intoxicated, and so I just thought, okay, why don't we try and get him some food that'll help sort of sober him up a little bit. And he wanted to sleep. We'd converted a van together in New Zealand, and he'd driven that to the pub, and he was adamant that he wanted to sleep in the van in the car park, which it's not a safe place to sleep. It's just, I understood why. I know that he wanted to sort of have his own space, but when it's not safe, I said to him, why don't we bring the car back home and you can just sleep in your van outside our place, and then you can still have your space, but you'll be safe. And it's very hard to reason with a drunk, angry person. But I put my foot down because it wasn't safe. Whereas usually I should have just left him, to be fair. But he hopped in my car. We were driving down the road to pick up some food, and we stopped at the lights, and he got out and ran. And it was very bizarre behavior. I hadn't seen him like this. I don't know why he was acting like this, but maybe it was to cool off. So anyway, I stopped and picked up the food, and then kept calling him, being like, Jack, come back in the car, where are you? And he made his way back in, and he'd be fine for a few minutes, and then he would just snap again, and he'd try pull up the handbrake or open the door while I'm driving. And it was very erratic behavior that I hadn't seen to this level before. And my goal was to just sort of get him home, and then me and my dad would go pick up the van, so then he can have his van, he can be in his own space. And we've got a very long driveway. It's about 600 meters long, and at this point it's about 8 p.m. at night, so it was dark. And when I pulled into the base of the driveway, he got out and ran. And so I just thought, okay, well, at least he knows he's in walking distance from home. I know where he is, that's fine. And I just went up and got my dad and said, hey, do you mind picking up this the van with me? And he kind of was like, where's Jack? And I said, oh, he's just gone for a walk. And so I didn't want him to think anything was wrong. So we drove down and picked up the van. I drove the van back. My dad drove my car. And I think mistake number 1 was my dad was driving in front of me. If he was behind me, it would have been fine. But on the drive back, I was calling Jack, asking if he's okay, where is he? And he was just irate. He couldn't believe that I had taken his van. He thought I'd stolen his van. It was just like reasoning with a drunk person. You just can't do it. And when I got to the bottom of the driveway again, I said, okay, I'm here. I jump in, and I couldn't see him. And I out of the corner of my eye, I could see him across the road. And then he just came running, and he started hitting the window. And I was a bit nervous at this point, and I knew he wanted the van. So he hit the window on the 3rd time, and it shattered. The glass shattered. And I just threw the keys, hoping that he would go for the keys because he wanted the van. But at this point, he didn't want the van. He wanted me. And he pulled me out of the van and sort of held me up against it and started screaming, you've made me do this. And at this point, I tried to escape. I tried to call the police, and he threw my phone and then threw me onto the ground and started just hitting me, should I say punching me in the face. And he kept repeating over and over again, "You made me do this." And I realized at this point that this is different. That the look in his eyes, he wasn't there. There was something else there. And there was nothing that I could do to sort of snap him out of this. And so I tried to fight back. I tried to sort of knee him in the groin or do something to protect myself. And as soon as I did that, at this point he was strangling me and pinning me down, and then he just dropped his knee into my ribs and fractured my ribs. And I started getting quite lightheaded at this point, and I knew I needed help, so I screamed help. And luckily, I live out in the country. Luckily, there was some neighbors outside that could hear this commotion, and they came running and just tackled him off me, these two guys. And if they weren't there, I don't know. I don't know if I would be here, to be honest. Like he was a different man then. I don't even want to say man. But yeah, I scrambled to go find my phone to call my parents to come down, and they asked, "Has he hit you?" And I said yes, and they were there within a split second. And luckily those neighbors were there, because my dad was pretty furious, as an understatement. And my mum was just distraught. She just couldn't believe what had happened. But Jack, the two guys that were outside were smoking weed, and Jack kept saying, "Well, I'm going to call the cops on you guys. This is illegal." And he managed to, even though they tackled him off me, he still managed to sort of flip it and put the blame on them. It's insane. Yeah, so they called the police. Because the situation had de-escalated and my parents were there, the police decided to come and take a statement the next morning. And that night, I can't stress enough how good Jack is at what he does. He managed to talk his way and manipulate his way to still staying at my house then. My parents are intelligent, successful people, very empathetic, but they've just seen their daughter being beaten, and Jack still managed to manipulate his way into staying and
not going to jail.
And not going to jail. And it's just, he just gets away with it. He knows how to do it. That's what scares me the most, is he's not someone that you would typically, he doesn't fit the stereotype. He's intelligent, and he knows how to get away with these things, and he has done for a long time.
See, I think that's interesting. You talk about a stereotype, and I can see you, and I know you, and I know your history, and I know your background. You don't fit the stereotype of someone who would be a victim of domestic violence either. And I think that's probably the biggest issue that we have, whether it be yachting or whether it just be suburbia America. This is not a socioeconomic issue. It is an everybody issue. It's an issue that has to be addressed. It's just that those that have a higher income bracket or a better education are taught through the years that that's not supposed to happen to them. So they're ashamed.
Yeah. And I do worry about, he should be behind bars, full stop. There's no question about that. I was with Jack, things ended about 3 years ago. And so he was still sort of climbing the ranks. And now that he has the experience and the tickets to be a captain, now that he's been put in sort of a position of power, I'd be worried about what that would mean for the crew on board.
Well, what happened next to you then? He spent the night there.
He spent the night there, and the next morning the police turned up. And at this point, Jack he was going to do it. He was going to kill himself. That was it. There was no going back. There was no way that he could continue his life anymore after this incident. And I was petrified that he would take his life. And I did everything I could to downplay the situation. The police took photos, and in New Zealand, when strangulation comes into play, it's not really up to the victim. They take it into their own hands, because you can choose to press charges or not, but when it's this severe, I don't have a say anymore. But I begged them not to arrest him. I said, he's going to kill himself. Like this, I can't have that on my head. I can't. And I was doing everything I could to try and just say as little as I could and to try and protect Jack. And he was applying for residency, and I just told them how hard his upbringing was, and they gave him the most minimum. I think we had a sort of stand down period of 2 days maybe, where he couldn't see me or contact me. We did work together, so that was also quite hard, but he ended up just staying in his van outside work for 2 days and then came home, and that was it. That was all he got.
Did the honeymoon phase start again at that stage then? He was amazing and wonderful and so apologetic and
best behavior, and at this point I said, like, you just cannot drink. Like you can't drink at all. Like if I'm going to try and make this work, if we're going to try and make this work, alcohol has to be out, and you've got to go to counseling. You've got to see someone weekly. Like there's no question about that. And he did start seeing someone, and he was very cooperative, and he seemed great again, right? There was one after this incident, he tried to one of the love bombing things he did was he booked me in for a massage, and we went in, and his Southern gentleman charm, like he wanted to surprise his girlfriend, and which I turned up to this massage, and something that just remains in my head is these ladies were like, "Oh, you're so lucky. He's so sweet. He's so thoughtful. You're such a lucky person to have him." And I was just screaming on the inside. At this point, I was a shell. I was just broken. Felt like I was in survival mode, and it just trying to wear that smile. You can't just tell someone, "Oh, well, I'm here because he beat me up." But you can't. It's horrible. And he was so good at just putting that front on. Yeah.
What was the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were?
So he had to go back to court. That had been pushed back quite a while. So he ended up leaving sort of early September. So we were in New Zealand together about 4 or 5 months, and he left to go back to court. And when he flew out, I hadn't heard from him for longer than what his journey was. And so I started worrying. I knew something was up. I knew that he would have contacted me once he landed. And when I couldn't get hold of him, I did a background search and found out that he had been arrested again once he landed. But he told me that Kirsten had placed more charges against him, and they arrested him when he landed. And I only found out recently that he actually landed and flew to Colorado and stalked her, and she had to call the cops on him. So I only just found that out a few months ago. But once again, poor Jack, right? How could his ex do this to him? And then he missed his court date, so that got pushed back, and which I think is probably all a bit of a lie. But yeah, he got put back in jail. Another thing that I realized when I did that background search is it showed his next of kin, and his mother's name was on there and her age. And Jack had told me that his mother died years ago when he was a child, and it showed that she was still alive. So I found out then it's a pretty big thing to lie about your mother being alive or not. So that I reached out to his sister and just said, what the hell? What's going on? He's back in jail and his mum's alive. Like, once you start finding these lies, you unravel them. And yeah, she led on that his mother actually had murdered her husband a few years back and gotten away with it. So, and she sent articles proving that this was true. So yeah, I can see why he didn't want to talk about it, but it's a pretty big thing to lie about. After that though, I was still led to believe that his ex had done it again, placed these charges against him again, and poor Jack. And so we were still together at this point, and
this was
were doing,
even after he had attacked you in New Zealand and
uh,
broken your ribs and
yeah,
all of that stuff. He still had you
yeah,
gaslit to the extent where you still believe she had no rights or no reason to want him in
yeah,
jail.
yeah, absolutely. No, I just thought, this poor guy, he's been through so much and he just needs help. That's where I was. That's where I was. And I had no idea of his previous. I thought this, I'd seen like little bits of abuse, but the one big assault that he had done to me, I thought was a one-off. I thought he'd never done that before. And yeah, I just wanted him to be okay. I don't know if I'm still making excuses for him or not. I don't want to be, but I feel like he endured so much abuse growing up that I don't think he actually thinks that what he does is that bad. I literally think that he only tries to sort of save face at the time. I don't think he's actually sorry for what he does. I don't think he thinks they're a big thing.
So that would mean that anybody that has ever experienced abuse as a child, it's okay for them to hurt somebody else in response. So now that you have been abused by your partner, do you think that in the future you go on to abuse your child? Or do you think that you will go on to abuse your next partner?
No, absolutely not. No, it's not an excuse. Not at all. No. It's made me, I had a very black and white perception on domestic violence, and before my time with Jack, and I've never encountered anything like this in my life. And I always had that perception of, well, if he hits you, you have to leave. Like, it's black and white, it's done. There's no, how could you stay with someone that's done that? It's such a clear decision-making process, right? And now it's not. It's so not. There is so much more that goes behind the scenes than just one physical assault.
It's grooming.
And
it's grooming. It really is.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, after that, Jack and I stayed together. We did long distance for a few months still. And I must say that was more painful than being with him and the physical assaults. He was just a nightmare. I think he could feel me sort of slipping through his grips, and he held tighter. And there would be times where I would be set to call at 5 p.m. and I'd be half an hour late, and he would go off. He'd be saying things like, "You're worse than my mum, you're worse than my ex," and he would threaten to commit suicide again. And I even once had a medical alert. I didn't hear from him after he threatened that, and then I got an alert from the hospital saying that he was there, and it was a legitimate alert from the hospital. And so there was so many incidents like that would just have me on high alert. And a few weeks later, he threatened it again. I mean, it was a weekly basis thing, and he went off the radar, and I contacted his friends that I knew he was with. And I tried to find him on Find My Friends. And when I clicked on, it's the first time I've ever tried to, I'm terrible at using that stuff, but I clicked on his name, and it came up with an alert that he had sort of set on me, that every time I left home, it would notify him. So he was sort of tracking me from the States. And yeah, like when I knew that he was safe that night and his friends found him, I started seeing more lies. And it wasn't until my girlfriend just couldn't see me go through any more hurt, she just started doing her own research, and she found this article from the Aspen Times, I believe, and that's about his ex, and that's the first time I saw that. And when I saw that article, that's when I started questioning everything. And once I started questioning everything, all the lies started unfolding, and I started realizing that I was just a little puppet. And that's when things ended between Jack and I.
Did you reach out to Kristen at that time, or was it later?
No, Kristen had messaged me The only contact we had, she'd sent 1 or 2 messages throughout our relationship saying, tell your boyfriend to stop contacting me. And that was kind of it. And I would show Jack and he'd be like, oh my God, she's reaching out to me, kind of thing. So that got blown over. But Kirsten and I didn't speak then. I still was led to believe that she was the crazy ex, and I just wanted nothing to do with it. I just stepped away from it all. I made contact with his dad a few months later because I had all of his belongings. He left New Zealand and left everything. He just took a duffel bag. So I still had all of his belongings. I tried to, much to my friends and family's dislike, they wanted me to just get rid of it, but I felt that I just needed to give it back to him. I still at this point wanted him to heal and do well. I just had to, I couldn't be in his life. I had to sort of look after myself at this point because I was not in a good place. Yeah, for months I'd just lost heaps of weight and became very dissociated, and yeah, it was horrible. So I reached out to try and deliver his belongings back to him, and it wasn't until a good 6 months later that I actually heard from his new girlfriend, and she had some questions and she needed to validate some things. So we had a conversation and I told her everything that had happened, but I still wished him well and hoped that he'd change. And I thought it was, once again, I keep saying a one-off, but I really didn't think it was, I thought it was a one-off. She, at this point, hadn't endured anything physically, mentally she had, and I sort of wished her well, but I knew that nothing that I would say would help. I secured a job, and it was in Fort Lauderdale in February 2020. And so I flew there and I knew he was around that area, and I was petrified. The first night I got there, because I had blocked him on everything. I blocked him on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, like you name it. And he would contact me via like Venmo. He would send me money, like 2 cents or whatever, and then he would attach a message. So he had his ways of contacting me, and it actually I'm going to backtrack here a little bit. It got a little bit nerve-wracking. He started posting videos that my friends could see of him being in New Zealand, and he was in cafes or on a bus in Auckland, and they would obviously tell me, and I was freaking out that he was here. And so I emailed him and said, are you here? And he was just like, he didn't deny it. He said, yeah, well, he said it. He's just in town and he's working here now. And I was very nervous at this point, and I contacted his dad, and his dad said, no, he's not there. He's in the States. So something inside of me just didn't feel good. So I went back to the police station here and I told them what was going on, and they put a border alert out for him. So if he ever tries to enter New Zealand, then he'll be detained at the border, and it shows due to strangulation. So I feel a bit safer here now. But
does this make you afraid then? Because are you still in yachting?
I'm still in yachting, and where I was kind of going is the first night that I landed in Florida is he sent me his location outside my bedroom at 2 a.m. I don't know how he knew I was there. He screenshotted it and emailed it to me. So he knew where I was, and he was just down the road. So I actually got a restraining order against him in the States as well, in Florida. And I've seen him once when I was out running in Fort Lauderdale, and he was cycling with his new girlfriend. And I was petrified. My stomach went into my throat, and I just sprinted. I ran, and I called my new partner to come and get me. And it's not a nice feeling. It's horrible to live on edge. So I've got a restraining order against him in the States as well. And
so he's wanted now in New Zealand and the US.
And the UK. Yeah. So I think his probation is over now because it's been 3 years. So I think the charges are dropped in the States now. So, and I believe in New Zealand, he might not be able to enter Australia as well, just with how the sort of internal affairs work there, or the agreements. So yeah, he's not allowed in New Zealand. Well, you can try.
What happened then between when you saw him in Florida and you had the restraining order placed against him? How did he end up in England? And was it the same girl?
Same girl. They were together, I think, 2.5 years after Jack and I were together. I don't know what boat he was on after that. I don't know his journey after that once his belongings were back. I hadn't heard anything for about 2.5 years even. Wasn't until a few months ago in June, perhaps, is when I got a message from Kirsten, and that she had said that, well, she'd asked for my sort of police records. She knew that there was an assault with me, and she'd asked if she could have them because his current girlfriend is in a situation, or I'm not sure. I think maybe his probation was expiring and she was going to try and extend it. I'm not too sure what her reason was, but I felt, even receiving a message from her, I almost wanted to message Jack's sister to be like, hey, like, I'm hearing from the ex, and and it's crazy that I still felt that way, but something inside me said, no, I'll reach out to his new girlfriend and just ask if everything's okay and if what Kirsten's saying is true. And she validated that and said that she was in a really dangerous place and she needed to escape, and she's planning an escape. And that's sort of where our lines of communication opened up. And that's when my partner sort of did some looking into it and realized that my partner's friend was working with Jack, and he gave him the heads up about what had happened to me. And that's sort of when his new girlfriend, we orchestrated a bit of a plan of attack to get her out and safe, which is really good. Safe from the physical damage, but there's still so much mental trauma that she's gonna work through, that he inflicts on everyone he comes into contact with.
Is the fear gone? Do you still have those days where you look out a dark window and you wonder if there's someone watching you?
I dealt with it and I think a lot of people deal with it this way, is when there's an issue, if it's too big to face, you kind of want to shove it right down, or you want to distract yourself or busy yourself, especially working in yachting. You get on a boat, it's the perfect distraction because you're working crazy hours and you're around a bunch of crew, and it's very easy to put that all aside. And I was running heaps. I hated running. Before meeting Jack. Half an hour would be my max, and I'd run until I was like, it's pretty late now, it's dark, I better turn around. I'd run for hours. And I think that was sort of my coping mechanism. I have only recently started sort of really facing it and opening it up and working through all the trauma that I'd buried. So yeah, 3 years later, and I'm glad I'm facing it now because it was too raw at the time. And I still don't know really where to look and how to handle it, but I am seeing someone that's helping me unpack all of this. And thank God for good girlfriends and family, because I don't know where I would be without them. I know that it still affects my parents really badly today. And now that all this has come to light, now that it's sort of public knowledge, and now that there's all these other stories, you're listening to what happened to Kirsten and his recent girlfriend and this new girl in Palma, it validates what happened, and it sort of enforces the severity, because I have minimized it so much. And yeah, it breaks. It's still really hard for my parents to sort of not have protected me throughout, but like, Jack picks on empathetic people, and yeah, he's just really good at what he does. He's really good at what he does, and he's getting away with it over and over again. And it is severe. Yeah.
One thing that I always question is that it's really hard to get people to believe, oh, you must have done something. Maybe you said the wrong thing. Or maybe it was because there was just too much alcohol. Maybe next time, don't let him. It's almost as if people assume that you're the one that is responsible for controlling that behavior.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. Not funny, but it's so relatable. I was talking to his most recent ex, and it's been really healing talking to her and to Kirsten. And she said, what did you do? What did you do that night? And the night that he broke your ribs. And I said, I wouldn't let him sleep in his van. And she laughed and she said, yeah. And I said, what did you do? What did you do that night? And she said, oh, I didn't pick him up on time. And it's like, yep, that would do it. Something that you just knew, like, if Jack was in that state, and it could be so minor, pick him up on time, or you won't let him sleep in an unsafe situation. It's like, that was it. That's all it took.
Well, and I'm going to be interviewing the most recent victim in some time coming. And one thing I want to clarify to all of the listeners out there is that I know all four of you. I've seen all four of you. I've had conversations with all four of you. All four of you are educated. All four of you come from a good background. And all four of you are pursuing your dreams. So the idea that there must be something wrong with you and the acceptance of his behavior in general in society that enables him to continue to repeat the offense is ridiculous. He even to this day in Palma has supporters.
Yeah. He will always have supporters on his side because he's Jack. He knows how to spin it. If he's in contact with you, then you'll believe what he says.
Well, I really hope that the industry pays attention to what is going on here. And this is one case that finally came to light, because if you think there is an issue about people talking about intimate partner violence or domestic violence on land, it takes it to a whole new level in yachting, because we all know how secretive the yachting industry is. So when abuse or violence of any sort happens on board, really no one talks about that. So if we're finally getting to the meat of this one man, how many more predators are out there in the industry? Because nobody does criminal record checks. You may be placing a rapist on board. You may be placing a monster on board who is free to find his victims, who is free to find whatever he wants on board because there has been no criminal record check done. When you get on that boat, you expect that your crew is equally there for the same reasons you are. And if somebody is charged and has the perfect angelic face and says all the right things, what do you have to say this is wrong? This can't possibly be right.
Yeah.
It has to change.
Yeah, it does. And I really fear that, I know for a fact now that this will happen again if it's not already happening. And my biggest fear in all of this is waking up, finding out that he's taken someone's life. And I'm not being dramatic here. I can see what he's capable of, and I know how unstable his environment is now, and his world is getting smaller, and he's getting more dangerous. And I just, that was my why of speaking today. I don't want to be named. I want to remain anonymous, but I have to validate my story. And hopefully help stop him doing this again, or raising awareness. If I'd searched his name and found all these articles when I was with him, then that would have been clear cut. It was a no-brainer. And I did search his name and things didn't come up. I couldn't find that. The only thing was that article, and I never found that until it was too late. And that's my why. I can't have a phone call and find out that even if he doesn't take someone's life, the fact that he's going to keep destroying another, what we've all gone through is really hard. And it takes a lot of energy and time and healing and recovery from the mental scars. And I just, knowing that will happen again, just saddens me, just really hurts me. And especially now that I'm in contact with his exes, they are such lovely girls. It breaks my heart that they went through what they went through as well. And to know that there'll be more, it just, like, he's got to be stopped. I mean, the damage that he causes, physically and mentally, I couldn't trust my own gut anymore, because I feel like I've been in the industry for a long time and traveled the world for a long time, and I've never come across a situation where I feel like my intuition's always been pretty spot on, and I've always been pretty safe, and I know when to let my guard down and who to trust, and that was gone with Jack. He broke past that part, and that scares me. And I remember having to literally call my girlfriends and be like, is this a rational thought? Like, I don't know. I couldn't trust my own decision making at times, and it throws you off. And even now, like in my current relationship or recent relationship, I always think that I'd be questioning everything. I'd be, but could he really mean this? Or could he do this? Or it really, like, I feel like I'm on high alert. It's not a healthy way to be and continue, and it causes so much more damage because you don't trust your own.
I think what people don't understand is that the ones that are best at this type of behavior are the ones that come across as the next door neighbor. They're suave, they're sophisticated, they can fit into any environment. They are everybody's best friend, very, very intelligent. And they're narcissistic sociopaths. They are capable of being in any room and mimicking any person. So they will be exactly who you want them to be to suit their purpose.
Yeah.
You'll never see them. They're hidden in plain sight. And that's what I think people need to realize, is that it could be your next door neighbor in Beverly Hills, who is worth 10 million euros or dollars or wherever you are, that drives a Porsche, that has a company, has a beautiful wife and a couple of kids, and you would die to do business with him.
Yeah.
It could be him.
Or a captain on a sailing boat.
I want to say thank you for your time and your courage.
Thank you. It's not easy to face this, but I know the reason why, and I hope that it helps someone else.
You have been listening to another survivor of a captain, and because we are not on screen, that is in quotation marks. A captain is supposed to support and protect and keep his vessel safe. And this man has no right to be called a captain. His name is Jack Magruder, and you've heard the story. Be careful, look out for him, spread his name, make sure he doesn't get hired, make sure that there is no more victims so that we don't have to have another interview of another survivor. My name is Ria. I have been your host. We'll see you again next time.